For our students and for all of those who are zooming in today. Uh, I can't possibly name folks that I know on here, but I see Bernie Imes' name. Bernie is a good friend and well known to my family and a well known paddler. We were at a wedding together, a family wedding a few years ago, and on top of his car was his kayak up in New York. He was going to go take in some water. So we have some real enthusiasts on to watch you today. We welcome our special guest to this program, Dustin Stensland. It's a privilege to have you share your great experiences with us. I mean, my gosh, not only the paddlers everywhere would look up to you as kind of the ultra paddler for the distance you covered with doing Old Man River. This is a huge venture that you've taken and that you're going to share with us. So Delta State is proud and pleased to welcome you. It's an incredible feat to have gone all the way from the source, the Canadian border area, all the way to the mouth of the river. And we're glad to have you with us to share some of the adventures and some of the pictures and things along the way. So without further ado, welcome to Delta State.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So yeah, I mean, Dustin, really, we just have a lot of eager people here that are excited to hear about your adventure, and of course excited to hear about some of the things that you did to get on this adventure. For the rest of us that are in the audience tonight, there are a couple people here that I'd like to thank. I know Rob Stein is here. Rob was a former student at Delta State University. He's now the program coordinator for outdoor program coordinator at UCA, University of Central Arkansas. And he's really the one that tagged you after seeing you, I think, interact with maybe Memphis Outdoors in Memphis. And so he said, hey, dude, get a hold of this guy. And so we did. So thanks, Rob. If you're there, give us a thumbs up. And thank you for appreciating you stepping in. And then I also want to give some thanks here to Taylor Byram. She is our graduate assistant for outdoor programs. She and I worked relentless to try to get the word out. I mean, I think she contacted 30, 40 different outdoor programs, different outdoor agencies, organizations, spreading the word on social media. I know we reached some groups in Canada, in Banff, all the way down to some stuff in St. Louis and all the way down to New Orleans to try to get the word out about you, about your adventure and about you speaking. So really tonight is all about you. We'll do some questions at the end. And for the questions, what I'd like to do is there's a chat box that you can open up, and you can simply put in your questions in that chat box. And then when we get to the point where we're going to do some questions, I'll go through and moderate those questions, and we'll try to answer those questions, or Dustin can try to answer those to the best of his ability. But I think we spoke today, and I think our goal from Dustin's standpoint is to tell his story. And with that, we do have some pictures and some videos that he had sent to us. And so you might be, your screen might be shared a little bit with some different videos that we had talked about doing. So other than that, Dustin, we're excited. Congratulations. And the floor is yours.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll give you a little background of how I got to paddling the whole Mississippi River. I think we had a little bio up. And let me see if I can see it again.
Yeah, I'll share. I can pop that up real quick.
All right. Yeah. So I think all my adventuring really started about 10 years ago. Really, my long distance ambitions probably started when I was about 8 years old. I think I seen a video of someone biking across America, and I thought that was just amazingly cool that people would travel long distances under their own manpower. So I think that's where I got to where I am now, where I'm enjoying these long distance travels. But as far as like why I wanted to paddle Mississippi River is because I grew up in Cass Lake, Minnesota, which is about a 30-minute drive away from Lake Itasca, which is the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And it starts off where the river starts off. It's about 20, 30 yards wide, maybe, and about ankle deep. And it's gorgeous up there, and it winds up to be where it's at, where it's a mile wide and going into the ocean. And so I graduated 2012 with a degree in sociology and a degree in Native American studies, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to build a traditional, it's called a Chippewa longnose birch bark canoe. And so that's where I kind of wound up wanting to paddle the Mississippi River, and we're, loving woodworking and wanting to paddle the river in a traditional canoe that I built myself. So that's what really, drove my ambition to do that. And so this is the video of me building the canoe up in northern Minnesota with the help of a boat builder. And so, I just growing up around the Mississippi or on the lakes, it really just allowed me to have the appreciation for the water and nature and the clean water. You can narrate some of the stuff we're going on. And so here I just, you stitch together the birch bark together into pieces. And then here's us putting it in a jig and making the general form of the canoe. And so the actual building process, we built the canoe in 2 days. It was 2 long days. It was a 18, 19-hour day the first day, then another 12-hour day the next day. So it was 2 long days. But it was absolutely enjoyable to build the traditional canoe from scratch, from materials that were locally harvested from birch bark and cedar, which are the cedar ribs and the cedar slats that run lengthwise, and the lashings are spruce rip. One reason why I felt it was important to go down in a canoe that I built myself was both the experience of building something with in a traditional form with resources that were locally harvested and not bought from somewhere. I feel like you have a much more appreciation for the journey when you're going with doing that with something you made. And so here we're putting the ribs in that were hand bent by steam, and then here's the next day we're actually planing out all the cedar and lashing the gunnels. And it was just an absolutely amazing experience learning from someone who has been building canoes for decades. So it's I would say there's nothing like going down the river and something that you made yourself, and it just that appreciation for that. I'm not the only person go down in a homemade canoe. I think it seems like every couple of years there's someone going down in a homemade canoe of some sort, whether it be a recycled canoe or various other materials. But I feel like that was the basis, was with my degree in Native American Studies and wanting to learn that tradition of birch bark building really started my interest. That really piqued my interest of going down the river. Here's a picture of just the vegetation and the greenery of where we harvested all the materials. And so this is just a lush Minnesota summer here. So that's what really had me pique my interest initially to go down the river. Is really gave me an excuse to build the birch bark canoe. Is really where it really piqued my interest to go down the river at first. Now I am a long distance. I enjoy long distance trips. I thru hiked the Pacific Crest Trail a couple years ago as well. And so to me, this is just another challenge. So let's see, where am I going next? So for me, it was a challenge as well as I'm not natural in the water. I used to be afraid of the water. Actually, I used to be afraid of swimming. Used to be afraid of deep water. And so for me, it was just an added challenge. And I felt like it was almost my obligation to paddle the river as I grew up near the source of the Mississippi River. If you want to go to, I think the drone footage of the small river drone footage, we'll kind of give a representation of what the river looks like at the beginning of the headwaters. And so what I wanted to do on this was do a video project. And so I brought a drone and a bunch of camera equipment and wanted to properly document my journey. And so this is about 10 miles into the river. It's very marshy, swampy, swampland. where you paddle about 100 yards and then you do a 180-degree turn and come around there. And it was a very frustrating but very satisfying day, I would say. You know, I would see beavers everywhere. I would see fish everywhere. I would see eagles everywhere, bald eagles everywhere. And, you know, I've often heard that the Mississippi is kind of broken into 4 separate sections. You have the headwaters to Minneapolis, and that's where you have this small river here, you know, small winding river, lots of debris and logs in the way. And I felt like this is where a good portion of the people, you know, Minnesota, if you don't make it out of Minnesota, there's a chance that you're not going to paddle the whole river just because it takes kind of perseverance to get past Minnesota. And so there's very few boaters on the river. I'd see maybe a boat every one boat a week, you know, not too many. In northern Minnesota, there's about, I believe 24 portages where it ranges from 50 yards to 1.5 miles is the longest one that I did. And this is what you'd often come across, where you'd have islands all around in the river, and there'd be a lot of offshoots. And to be honest, the first month on the Mississippi River, most days look like this picture, and it felt very serene, where, you know, there wasn't that windy, wasn't that stormy, great for picture taking, and you know, it was just awesome. Where I felt you're really just out there exploring nature and appreciating nature, and especially in a you know, kind of a year like this, where it's kind of nice to get away from everything and just appreciate nature. I felt that it was pretty fortunate for having that ability to do that. One of the main challenges in northern Minnesota is that the water levels are low this year, so there was almost no current. So you have almost no current, you know, that were pushing me downriver. You know, after Minneapolis is when you don't have to portage anymore. So after Minneapolis, you get to lots of locks and dams, which is a time lapse of, this is, I can't remember what lock this is. And it's a little choppy here because it was a time lapse. So the frame rate's a little wonky here, but this is what this is what it looks like going through a lock. So I'd go in there by myself. They would close the gates, lock down anywhere from 2 feet to, I think the largest one is a 42 feet drop. And so it takes about 15 minutes. And so this would be about a daily occurrence for about a month. I believe there's 27 locks, if I remember right. So the middle of the river so what I consider the middle river is from Minneapolis to St. Louis. That's where the last lock is. That's where there are also the most pleasure boaters or fishermen are. So every day I'd pass, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of boaters on the weekends, which is both a hindrance and kind of a gift. You know, a hindrance is that I have to avoid a lot of boaters, but there's also a lot of what they call river angels, where river angels will stop by, ask you how you're doing, if you need any water, drinks, food, snacks. I've stayed at people's cabins, you know, asking if I needed any help. And so this is probably my most enjoyable part of the river, just because the people is what makes traveling and adventuring the most satisfying. And I met the most amount of people from Minneapolis to St. Louis. Minneapolis, St. Louis is where I also seen the most amount of I'd say agricultural runoff, where I started to see more farms, more less trees, less lakes, and more flatlands. And so it was truly a different scenery. You know, like I said, it's dividing the river in 4 parts. It's, you know, that's where it got most enjoyable just for them people. You know, that's where I seen the most amount of people. That's where the banks were muddy. That's where you'd see more trash on the banks. I think this is a picture from New Orleans. This is quite a bit further down. Let's see. You got to St. Louis. Yeah. So after St. Louis, you get a lot more larger barges, a lot more faster currents. So I was going about twice as fast as I was going up there. You'd get a lot more cities. I mean, you'd have a lot fewer small towns, but you'd have a lot more larger cities like this, which made for a lot of interesting camping, because normally camping would be kind of desolate or isolate. I mean, kind of out in the middle of nature, where after St. Louis, there were a lot of places I camped like this, which you'd have a nice cityscape. You know, if you wanted to, you could get off the river and explore. And again, meet people, meet different types of people. And that's kind of going back to, again, I think that's the most important part for traveling for me is the people. You meet different types of people. You meet people from all walks of life. You meet people from, conservative, liberal, whatever, whatever type of demographics that you could make an example of. And so that's that's what I loved most about getting past St. Louis. This is another drone footage of past St. Louis, where with the low water levels, you'd have a lot of sandbars. I think the water levels are about 10 to 15 feet lower this year than the last 5 years. And so you'd have a lot of situations where this is what my campsite would be, before I started reaching the big cities, is where, you'd come across a bend and then just be hundreds of yards of sandbars, which would be perfect to camp on. And so what I truly enjoyed about the, different aspects of the river is you have different sections, like I said, 4 sections. You have northern Minnesota, you have Minnesota to St. Louis, St. Louis to New Orleans, New Orleans down to the Gulf. And each one has different challenges. And, on this trip, I really didn't plan much. And I felt that was important for my trip, so that I could be kind of surprised by my own. I wouldn't expect. I wasn't over planning anything. I wasn't planning on where to stop at. So whenever I came across someone and they said, "Oh, you should stop at this place. You should stop at that place," I stopped at Hannibal, where Mark Twain was born, and stopped at Jackson's Island and camped there for the night, which was, again, an amazing experience as far as meeting the people who really fall in love with their own, local historic attractions. And that's really, the reason why I enjoy these trips and doing these trips. In like 2016, I bought a 1978 Westfalia, Volkswagen Westfalia bus, and toured around America for 13 months. Again, so I can meet the people, meet the people, take pictures, really see everything that you're doing, or see every aspect of America, I should say, or at least try to. And so this is this time lapse. Yeah, this time lapse of, again, repairing my canoe, doing the different types of repair on the canoe. So I think I replaced about 8 lashings on my canoe. I'll probably have to repair another 20 maybe, after I get my canoe back and have to do all my repairs. So it's actually, this kind of leads to, I say, one of my challenges. Probably my biggest frustration on the river was the amount of repair work that I had to do on my canoe. Mostly the leaks. The lashings weren't too bad. I had to completely disassemble my canoe 3 times because nothing's glued, everything's in there by pressure. So I had to do a lot of patchwork, a lot of repairs, lots of relashings. I'd say that's one of the most frustrating parts, is repairing my canoe and then 3 days later having it leak again, which I knew that was a prospect I might have to deal with a homemade canoe, birch bark canoe especially. But I felt that was really important for, again, my journey of going down in a homemade canoe, doing something a little bit more difficult, a little more something unique. I would say probably, aside from the leaking, breaking, repairing canoe, most challenging thing was definitely the wind. As far as all the way from the start to the finish, the wind was the most challenging. I finished about almost 4 or 5 days later than I wanted to, because I had in the last 3 days, I had a strong 16-mile-an-hour wind that I was paddling against after I passed Baton Rouge. I was not really think about that too much. I mean, I obviously knew that was a possibility, but the wind was definitely the hardest. At one point, the second to the last day before I finished, I was going about a half a mile an hour, getting almost nowhere. So I figured I just paddled to the edge of the river and walked the canoe about a mile or two along the river because it was twice as fast as I was going just paddling. And there were quite a few days which I felt like quitting, especially past Baton Rouge, because Baton Rouge to about mile 50 before the end of the river. Crazy amount of ships, full size ships, shipping containers, the port of New Orleans. I felt like quitting almost every day, to be honest, because of the wind. You're fighting, staying out of the river traffic, trying not to get run over by barges or tows that are pushing around single containers. And so yeah, the wind mixed in with that going past Baton Rouge was a challenge. So, and here's the pictures of the ships. It was when I really actually got to the major port of New Orleans. Yeah, and that was probably some of the hardest, one of the hardest things I've probably done in my life, is kind of pushing on and keep doing that. But whenever I think about the, I'm pretty, resilient, stubborn person. So just coming to something like that where every day I felt like quitting is just, I feel like stubbornness or bullheadedness is often a negative trait, but I feel like I try to embrace that stubbornness and actually push through those moments in which I don't want to push through anymore. And for every bad day, there's a good day. Like this is that sunset's a good day. And I feel like that's one of the important thing about doing a trip like this is that you take the good days or the bad day. If every day was a good day, you don't appreciate those good days. So I almost feel like you have to have those bad days. You have to have those frustrating days. I mean, there were days where I was fighting the wind, and with every ounce of my soul, I was yelling at the wind and just frustrated and kind of hating life. But it really made me appreciate the good days and made me appreciate when boaters would stop by and offer beer, offer water, or offer snacks or barbecue. Or I stayed at many people, strangers' house, and they just said, "Oh, this is my cabin, and we're not going to be here, but you can stay here for a couple of days if you want to." So it's just those good days, those, like I said, the people, you meet so many good people. And I feel like especially nowadays where you spend so much time hanging around the same group of people, you end up with social media, and you don't really get to see the amount of good people in the world. You don't get to be able to see nature. You don't be able to, you don't appreciate waking up to birds chirping, and get to wake up, you don't get to fall asleep to hearing beavers hunt and make splashes and play. And like I said, I feel like the good has to come with the bad, in my opinion. And so challenge, and the meeting the people makes the challenge worthwhile. And so it's like the wildlife. I didn't get as many pictures of the wildlife as I was hoping to, and I was excited to see my first alligator in the wild down here in Louisiana about 3 days before I finished. Again, I'm from Minnesota, so I haven't seen too many southern wildlife as far as gators, or I haven't spent too much time in the south here. But I enjoy it, and so I've seen lots of bald eagles, lots of beavers, lots of fish. Seen a lot of beavers swimming underwater up in northern Minnesota. So it's, and one of the important projects that I didn't fundraise for anything this year because I didn't want to be tied down, and I wanted to work on my project. But one of the important things that I wanted to discuss was the ecosystem of the river and water conservation. And that, south of Minneapolis, and especially south of St. Louis, there were a lot of loose trash on the banks of the river. there weren't too much in the middle of the river. But wherever I'd find a campsite, there'd generally be a lot of trash on the banks, from a lot of plastic bottles and a lot of general river trash. But I think the biggest detriment to the river right now are fertilizers, whether it be nitrates or phosphates, are creating algae on the river. And so after St. Louis is when algae started building up on my canoe. And that's where, by the time I finished, there was a very thick layer of algae. And the further south I got, the warmer the water got, and the worse the algae got. And I feel like there's like a deference of responsibility often. What I've kind of heard, what I've kind of described on the river, is because where I grew up in northern Minnesota on the lake, everyone around the lake feels part of responsibility, whether if someone's contributing to pollution, or if there's pollution, there's a group of people that say, okay, this is kind of our lake. Whereas on the river, it feels like everyone kind of has their section, whereas there's millions of people north of you, there's millions of people south of you, and so there's almost kind of a deference of responsibility. And so I passed a lot of farms, a lot of, whether it be RV parks or places like that where they're using fertilizers to grow their grass. And it's creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. It's creating algae blooms on the river, so fish will have less ability to survive because it's less oxygenated. So that's, and the algae on my canoe and on my paddle was really the biggest way that I could visually see that, because it was really striking. I wasn't expecting my canoe and my paddle to gather so much algae because I'm moving so much every day. And so just the ecological aspect is one of the more important things that I wanted discussed, and I wanted to, have a more importance, because I feel like for me personally, the most important aspect of it is meeting people and getting people to have interest in chasing their dreams, and getting people to interest in appreciating wildlife and appreciating the outdoors more. Because the last decade or two, especially the last 5-10 years, has been a huge amount of people that are going outdoors and appreciating and hiking and canoeing. But as someone who has experience doing all those things, I see a lot of people that aren't practicing the leave no trace. There's a lot of people that are littering. There's a lot of people that I feel aren't appreciating nature because they haven't grown up near, grew up around it, or grew up with the importance of cleaning nature. But on the river, the amount of river trash, and again, the algae blooms, is something that I feel like is important and not gaining enough steam. And I think it's better than what it has been, from 30-40 years ago. But I feel like it has to have a more driving importance just for that aspect. So again, for me, I think the most important aspect is meeting people. But, I think we really have to have a more importance on whether it be finding a way that farmers can fertilize their lands in a safe way, in a way that we can try to get the loose trash off the river, off the banks of the river. And it kind of takes a little bit of everyone. If one state does a little, if just Louisiana, helps get nitrates and phosphates out of the river, well, there's still, 7 other states that north of them that is still going to be contributing to the pollution. So I think that's an important aspect, which, with more people interested in doing these things, and more people being interested in paddling in the outdoors, I feel that we can start collectively heading in that direction, that positive direction of cleaning up, cleaning up what we use and appreciate. And so I really didn't see too many paddlers. It was mostly boaters, which I probably seen less than 20 paddlers on the river, which I was kind of surprised about that. And maybe that's kind of speaks about the river, though, why, if you're in a boater and you're flying by all the trash on the river, you don't necessarily see all the trash on the river. But it's, I feel like there are a lot of regular boaters who do see that, but they don't. It's not an importance, so it's again, I don't know what type of groups are out there. I know I'm part of a Rotary club that's starting to focus on cleaning up the river. And that's kind of in the beginning stages of starting a process to help the river and help the river get fully cleaned up.
It's almost like a interstate situation where you have an interstate going through these number of states, and you see these cleanup sections on per state. Some states definitely take it more serious maybe than other states. So, well, look, we have a lot of questions. If you want to go ahead and jump into some of these, Mark Dix has asked you, what was one of the most single scary part of your journey?
I would say the most scary part of the journey was New Orleans port. That was the scariest. Full-size ships, or full-size, actual shipping container ships. That's where I had a marine radio, which not everyone who paddles down the river carries a marine radio, but I could call out to all the ships. I could call out to the barges. I could call out to the tows. I could call out to any ship on the river. Mm-hmm. But still, it's still a challenge because I'd have, three barges going southbound, and then I'd have, 2 ships going northbound, and I'd have to find a way where, the correct place to be. Because if I'm too close to shore, where the depth of the river gets more shallow, those waves are going to be bigger. And so I had to be far enough from shore where the waves wouldn't be huge, but far enough away from the shipping channel that I was out of their way. So it was a very fine line between, being out of the way, but not being too far.
Yeah.
So,
Jim Atkinson would like to know a little bit about your food situation. How did you resupply? I mean, kind of maybe what was your food situation? What was your menu perhaps? And then maybe did you sort of calculate your calorie intake, outtake?
Well, I did not calculate my calorie intake. I actually did not lose any weight. I lost some fat, but I gained it back in muscle. But I wound up at the exact same weight. And apparently that's pretty common. On the Pacific Crest Trail, I lost 48 pounds, which I think I went from 180 pounds to 130 something. So I lost a lot of weight on that. I was expecting to lose weight on this, but didn't lose any weight. Mm-hmm. But my resupply situation again was I didn't plan almost any part of this trip because I wanted everything to be a surprise, and I felt like you can over plan an adventure, you can over plan a big trip like this. If you plan every single stop, it kind of takes a little bit of the fun and situations from it, or like the happy unexpected situations from it. My resupply situations were about every 3-4 days I'd try to go into town, get a good burger, get something greasy, get a lot of calories, and then I would get I bought a cooler, so I'd have milk, so I could have milk and cereal. I kind of ate luxury this year because I'm used to eating very, very outdoorsy, where it's nothing but ramens and mac and cheese. That's my typical adventure meals. But so
that's why I like canoeing the most rather than backpacking, because you can take a lot with you.
Yeah, you can take a lot with you. So I drink a lot of Dr. Pepper and a lot of Coca-Cola. It's not very healthy, but after a full day of paddling, you want something on ice and cold carbonated. But
one of my students is asking you a little bit about your situation on resting. Like, when did you rest, and when did you feel it was safe to do so?
It was as far as like sleeping or just resting, or
yeah, I'm assuming sleeping probably, like, because you slept at night. You didn't paddle through the night, so.
I paddled through the night less than 10 times. But I loved paddling at night with a full moon, and you have the stars, and that's generally when the wind is the calmest and there's less boaters on the river. So actually night paddling was one of my favorite. I had like a 360 light. I had the proper lights for my canoe as well to paddle at night. But that was actually one of my favorites, is night paddling. But it was not difficult to find campsites this year because the water was so low. So again, with the sandbar drone footage, there was just a lot of available campsites. But my favorite was hammock camping. So I had both a hammock and a tent.
Mhm.
So yeah, but sleeping situations and resting situations was very easy this year. Apparently, the last 4 years have been very difficult because with the water higher,
Mhm.
all the beaches and water lines are flooded out. So that can get very challenging. But so finding campsites were pretty easy.
Mark Bix would like to know a little bit, if you were to do anything over again, what would you maybe do differently?
If I were to do anything over again, see, I don't know if I'd necessarily do anything over again. I'd say,
So
oh
you
man,
wouldn't do this again?
yeah, the wind was frustrating. I mean, it was tempting to have the paddle I used was a traditional paddle as well. So it was a very heavy wooden paddle.
Mhm.
Paddling against the wind would have been much, much easier in a kayak paddle, even though I'm in a canoe.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if I necessarily do that over because again, I kind of like that it was a traditional paddle. I kind of like the challenge. I kind of like that it frustrated me so much. But some of the things I brought, I didn't need. Some of the things I didn't bring, I needed. But nothing was catastrophic. So I don't know if I would have necessarily done anything over again necessarily. So.
A couple of the participants tonight would like to know who the boat builder that assisted you and what city that he live in.
He lives in Big Fork, Minnesota. So it's a town of 80 people. I'm from a town of 800 people, so it's I'm pretty used to small towns. But so he's from Big Fork, Minnesota. It's northern Minnesota. His name is Ray. He's from with Hoffman Boat Works. I think he might be retired now. He was I think he was early 70s, so late 60s. So yeah, I had his help. He's the one who showed me all the techniques, how to do everything and how to gather materials. And so he might still have a few canoes. These canoes are, if you buy these canoes are normally about $4,000 to $5,000 to buy them new. So there's still a handful of traditional birch bark canoe builders around the United States, but they're pretty sparse, hard to find.
Jim also was asking a little bit about your camping supplies, which I think you mentioned some, but was there anything that proved to be a really valuable piece of equipment on your trip?
Which broke?
I'm sorry, anything that proved to be very valuable, a piece of equipment that you thought was the most valuable on your journey?
Well, I don't know if there's any piece that was particularly the most valuable. Let me think for a moment. Well, to start the river, the first week or two, my most valuable piece was I had a handsaw. So I had a Kelty 9-inch handsaw, like a folding handsaw. It was a really nice handsaw, but it probably saved me about 3 portages within the first week because the river is only about 20-30 feet wide. And if a tree falls over the bank of it, it blocks the entire river. And so the base of the tree would be about 5 feet off the river. And so I'd paddle up to it, cut down all the branches so I could have a little lane that I could keep going on to. And so the first week, that was definitely my most favorite piece of equipment, because if I went to have that, I would have had to carry my canoe up a 5-foot bank and then go around it. And so at the beginning of the trip, that was definitely my most valuable piece. Other than that, my good proper equipment, I would say. I met another through paddler about 2.5 weeks into my trip. I paddled with him for about 2 weeks. He didn't have a lot of experience long-term camping, I should say. So he didn't have the right tent stakes. So at one point, there was a heavy storm that came through, a tornado system came through, and it was about 60-mile-an-hour wind. And I was sleeping in my hammock still. But I had proper tent stakes. I knew how to set up my rain fly in the direction of the wind. And he did not. He had pretty basic kind of just straight wire stakes. That was the exact same, and the tarp was the exact same size of his hammock. About 3 a.m., his rain fly came out, and he was instantly drenched.
Oh wow!
And so, what I would say my most important pieces were proper equipment for the situation. So it's not, particularly any piece, but it's, doing good research and knowing what equipment to use when, as I would say.
In hindsight, Mark would like to know if there was an element of your preparation that you're really grateful for.
The preparation I would be most grateful for is probably my marine radio. I learned about some of the, the language used by the ships and the barges, because there's, over the radio they'll say, "I'll meet you on the 1, meet you on the 2." Now, historically, when barges didn't have radios, they would have their horns. So they'd say, "I meet you on the 1." They'd sound the horn once, which means they'd pass each other going a certain way. If they honk twice, that means they'd go another way. And so that was probably my most best thing I actually researched, was how to deal with the barge traffic the further south they got. And probably my most valuable resources probably my second most favorite valuable resources that I had were portages. So like there's a Facebook group, the Mississippi River Paddlers page, where they have aerial views and pictures of each portage. So rather than coming up to a dam and having to figure out where the proper takeout and put in place is, I could actually see, okay, the put in is 300 yards from the bank here, and this is how we go. So,
you kind of answered this a little bit about your animals. You didn't see much, but did you have any particular run-in with any animals?
Not. Well, I had I woke up to a deer that was sleeping about 20 yards from me, and so I was sleeping in my hammock. And as soon as I started rustling and got up, I peek over my hammock, and there's a decent sized buck that was sleeping 20 feet from me.
Oh, wow.
He scared me just as much as I scared him. So
Yeah.
so other than that, I seen a beaver swim underneath the water in northern Minnesota. It was about 5 feet of water, and there was a bunch of fish that were about a foot and a half, 2 feet long. And all of a sudden I look around and I see a 4 feet, what I initially thought was a huge fish in the river. I'm like, oh, that's huge. Oh, that's a beaver. So,
Did you have any incidences with the Asian carp at all popping around?
I had some hit me at night. I think it was in Iowa, and I was paddling at night in the middle of the night because it was full moon, stars are out. It was a perfect night to paddle all night. I think I paddled till like 5 a.m. But they scared the crap out of me a couple times because they put my paddle in, and a couple times those Asian carp jumped up, and a couple of them hit my back or my sides and the ribs.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they at night especially, because you're not expecting them. But yeah, so I never haven't had any fish jump in my boat, but and luckily I was going slow enough for the Asian carp didn't hurt me. So
yeah, see, we've had them jump in our boats, in our canoes out here at Island 69 with students that were first timers, and it was not a really great experience. So for us,
yeah, they're big too.
President Ford would like to ask you if your canoe is outfitted for like kneeling or knee pads, or did you have a lean on the crossbar or seated? And then did you happen to take any spills from any of the barges that would create waves?
Well, traditionally the Native Americans who built these boats, you'd be kneeling. Now paddling 12 hours a day, generally I'd paddle all day. So once I got in my canoe at like 8 a.m., I wouldn't stop until sunset, and that was pretty much every single day. I would take my breaks on the river and let the current give me an extra mile or two while I was taking a break. So I built just kind of a very rudimentary wooden box for me to sit on, which was not very great for my lower back, but lots of stretching every day. I did not take any spills, again, about the largest, because I was careful to stay far enough away from the bank to not get huge waves. I'd always face the waves and the wakes from the ships and the barges.
I think we have a picture of your setup here, maybe there.
Yeah, so this is my setup. I was sitting in the far back. And so you see my cooler there, the yellow dry bag is all my camping gear. There's a black Pelican box in the middle with all my camera equipment. And, probably the thing that kept me most sane was my Bluetooth speaker there. So that would actually allow me to listen to podcasts or music, or kind of have modern luxuries, I should say. And I had a big GoPro, or not GoPro, Goal Zero battery pack, a 400 megawatt battery pack with a 50-watt solar panel. So I had a large electronic setup, so I could recharge all my equipment. Yeah, what was this? Oh, this was in,
I think this was in Vicksburg when you stopped down there with Lane Logue and Qualpa Outfitters, right?
yeah, that was in Vicksburg. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, one of the biggest resources, I don't know if this is a question, but one of the big resources for supplies was river angels. There's kind of coincidental river angels that you just pass on the river and they'll drive up to me and ask me how I'm doing. But there's also a Facebook page for paddlers, river angels, where you kind of just say, oh, I'm going through St. Louis today.
Mm-hmm.
Can anyone help me? Can anyone help me resupply? Can anyone have a place to shower?
Mm-hmm.
Shower is my main thing, because it's you get pretty nasty out there paddling 12 hours a day. So there's a lot of people on the river that want to help out paddlers.
You may have answered this, but Mark would like to know if, in retrospect, would there be any design changes you'd make with your canoe, and if so, why?
Design changes. Well, the biggest thing, it wasn't necessarily a design change. There was one piece. It's not different. It's not a difference in the design, but there's on the hull of the canoe, there's 3 big pieces of birch bark, and the center part was a little bit thin. And that one I had about, at the end of the river, it probably had about 50, 60 different little pinhole leaks in it. So I probably would have hunted around and tried to find a better piece of birch bark for it. I think for the actual design of it, it was very functional. I think I think in a normal setting, it would have held up a lot better. But considering I was, for 3.5 months on the river every single day, hitting rocks, dragging it in mud, it was treated a lot harder than an average canoe would go through. So the design wise, I think it was a pretty solid design.
One of my students would like to know, what was the very first thing you did when you completed your trip? Because there must have been thousands of people at the bottom there waiting for you, I'm assuming, right? So
yeah, first thing is kind of the thing I do kind of every time I get into places. Ate some food, drank a couple beers, kind of, especially once I finished, it was just like,
yeah,
it was kind of just a relaxed feeling, because every time I paddle into a new place, so I paddled all the way down, and I got a ride back from these barge workers, because they seen me. I got to the end, and then I kind of, it was 16-mile-an-hour north wind, so I had almost no chance of paddling back basically 20 miles back to Venice, Louisiana. And so basically I was out in the middle of the river, kind of sticking my thumb out, trying to get a fisherman to stop to give me a ride. And so these barge workers, they noticed me after about an hour, and I said, all right, we have a boat, we're working right now, but we have a boat which we might be able to take you back. And so I got on their boat. After waiting another 2 hours, they put me on their boat. They drove me right back to Venice Marina, and they dropped me off. And there was, a bunch of people there that were, looking at me, because here comes this, barge transport boat dropping off a canoe with a big old beard. So
you didn't have anybody really like logistically waiting for you, or that you had made connection with?
Well, I had my girlfriend flew down here and planned on, we were planning on getting a rental car, and we're going to drive back to Minnesota. And so, but logistically, there wasn't a big, large group.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be a group back in Minnesota, friends and family that are excited to see me. But again, kind of going back to the not planning a whole lot on this trip, I kind of wanted things to happen organically and see, so.
That's got to be sort of a strange, though, scenario, right? Because most of us who do any kind of like 5Ks or half marathons, there's this big finish, right? With like this, gala where you get a medal and it's like completion. But for you literally paddled down to the end and it was just nothing, right? I mean, explain your emotions maybe with that.
Yeah, it was, the emotion was relief. a part of it because like I said, the last week was miserable for me with the wind, and it was one day I didn't drink enough water, so I had a horrible headache. And so once I finally finished, and especially once I actually got back to the marina, I had a relief of, oh, I can sleep in a bed every day now. You know, I can shower every day now. I can actually go out and eat, eat well every day. But it was definitely a little anticlimactic where, when I through hike the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail has 4,000 to 5,000 people a year that apply for the permit to do it. And so when you finish, you're around a bunch of other people who finished around the same time period, maybe a dozen or two people who are also excited to finish.
Right.
Whereas on the Mississippi, there's maybe a couple dozen people that do it, maybe a dozen people a year that finish. And so like your likelihood of even seeing anyone else that's paddling the entire river is very minute. But also when you finish, it's like you have no cell reception. You have to either paddle all the way back to civilization. And so it's just a weird feeling of, oh, I'm done. Now
now let's get back to where I can get something to eat.
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. So there's a couple other questions here. Let's see. My student Nathan Garrick would like to know perhaps how many miles a day did you typically travel or paddle?
So it primarily mattered on the, it came down to current and where I was at. In northern Minnesota, where the smaller river, no current, a lot of winding current. You'd paddle 100 yards and come to a complete stop. Paddle 100 yards, come to a complete stop to do the turn. Yeah. So northern Minnesota, I was doing about 25 miles a day. 25 miles was a long, hard day of paddling. Minneapolis to St. Louis was about 25 to 30. St. Louis to New Orleans, or St. Louis to Baton Rouge was about 45, 50 miles a day. And then Baton Rouge, it seemed like the current just stopped at Baton Rouge, and I was going about 25 miles again, 25, 30 miles.
Yeah.
So it just varied mostly by current.
One of my colleagues is on here, Michael Morgan. He's the outdoor program director down at University of West Florida. And Michael, if you can pop on, I don't know your question here. You might want to ask him yourself, because I'm not exactly sure what you mean by your question.
Hey, I was just curious. Was there anything specific you needed to do to get approval to be able to build the boat with the boat builder? Like you mentioned, it's about $5,000 to build one of those boats. So how did you get the opportunity to build it with them?
I just asked around as a primary thing. I didn't. I wound up with him because there was a couple other Native American elders in the area who were busy that summer, so I didn't have the opportunity to build with them. But I contacted this boat builder, and he was ecstatic that I could, he could help on a project that would go down the entire river in a birch bark canoe, because how often does that happen? So I didn't need any, I wasn't necessarily too particularly hard, but within the outdoor community, once you start talking to people and have interest in doing something so unique and interesting, people are pretty excited to help. So,
did you have any experience prior to that, or did you learn it all while you were doing it then?
Well, I have a lot of woodworking experience. Eventually, I like to get to the point where I build custom furniture as a living, and so I love woodworking, and I love, building new things. And so something like this was actually it was pretty natural for me to kind of pick up and, go out in the woods and find supplies and build something like this. So I seen another, I think there was someone in the chat who asked, I don't know if you have any more questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few more, but Jessica, if you're still on here too, you might want to pop on and maybe ask your question. I think you're asking if he's willing to come talk to a canoe trip camp maybe or something, but if you want to pop on and just ask.
Yeah, hi. So we actually live in Bemidji in the summer, and we run a French Wilderness canoe tripping program. And we actually just acquired a birch bark canoe from Star Island in Cass Lake.
Oh yeah, cool.
Right? So your hometown right there. So we would just be curious if you would be willing to come and even just teach us some of the basics of how to maintain our canoe, as well as talk to our kiddos. Mind you, we're in French. We're teaching them the French Wilderness, reading. But would love to have you come out. And then the second thing is we actually paddled with Rusky in November, and we're hopeful that, did you get to experience any of John Rusky and his magic on the river?
That's the first question. I'd love to come out back. I'll be back in Bemidji in a week. So,
Okay, well, we're not there until next summer, dependent upon COVID, so.
okay, well, yeah, next summer I'll definitely make a trip back and help you
Okay.
out with that. So we'll find a way to do that. I didn't have the ability to meet up with John Rusky because I was too busy, unfortunately. Well, what I mean by too busy is I had a time frame. By the time I got down passing John Rusky with the Quapaw Canoe Company, time was starting to be a crunch. And so he had just started his project on the dugout canoe.
Yeah, they
Yes.
just fell a tree, I think, that day or before or something that you got there.
Yeah, so I was kind of bummed that now that time has passed, I almost wish I would have taken the time to do that. But when you're on the river every day struggling, and when you're in that mile crunching mentality, where you're like, okay, I'm 1,000 miles away now, and you paddle. Now you're like, okay, now I'm 950 miles away, paddle. It becomes you're always reaching for the next goal, and I kind of had that mile crunching mentality, and I almost wish I would have stopped and seen.
Well, let me be the first to invite you on your way back home if you're driving through to stop at Delta State University, and we'd love to have you here, and then we can certainly drive up and let you meet John Rusky, and let you experience him and his river magic right there at his shop for sure. I think I'm sure Jessica would attest to that. So if you are on your way back up and you are driving, by all means, please let us know, and we'll make accommodations for you here.
Yeah, for sure. And I
We're
did
right
see
on the river, so we're on the way home.
Yeah, I'll definitely be interested in driving back up. I'm gonna spend another day or two in New Orleans and then make my way up there. So I'd love to stop by and chat. And
John is definitely a worthwhile meeting. He's just got a really interesting perspective, and he's just a neat man. And so I think I don't know if your entire river trip would be complete without maybe even meeting him. I think that he's that much of an influence. I think.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of told. I stopped by Muddy Mike in St. Louis, and he told me I should stop by there as well. So
yeah, it would be an experience. Plus, I mean, I think the Delta for you would be on land. It would be a cool experience for you, and there's a couple of really neat attractions. And I know President LaForge might even be willing to meet you if he's here, and we can arrange that. But yeah, it'd be a really cool experience. So if you do get back up on Highway 61 and get a crossroads, we'd be happy to take you up and meet John. So
yeah, for sure.
Is there any other questions? It seems like, Jen, you may have had a question too. A coincidence today, you bought a new camp saw to up your game against some of the bigger downfalls. What element from this experience will you stand in good stead for future adventures?
I'm sorry, what was the question? What was the what?
Let's see, what element of learning from this experience will stand you in good stead for future adventures?
Oh man, again, the perseverance. Well, that was my main thing. I said this was probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life, and I would probably, I think I've done a lot of hard things in my life as far as, I used to have a job where I was working 120 hours a week. I think my longest shift was 43 hours straight without a break. As far as, through hiking the PCT, doing that. And so it's like, this was still one of the hardest things I've done, is fighting the wind and being frustrated. So there was one day on the river, I was so close to just being like, I'm done. I'm getting off the river, next chance. And ultimately, I'm glad that it didn't. So as far as actual learning experience was just pushing through that and just refusing to quit. So
where was that? Do you remember, like, what part of that?
I was about 40 miles past Baton Rouge.
Oh, so almost done though. Yeah.
Yeah, I was almost done. Relatively almost done. And I was having zero fun. The wind, avoiding ships, barges. I was just like, I'm done. I don't like this anymore. I was just hating life. And then I got to camp, made some food, got some sleep, and I woke up the next morning going, I feel better now. All right.
Yeah.
And you really have to force yourself to get in that positive mind frame, because it's easy to just, especially when you're by myself out there.
Yeah.
It's easy to just get into that negative mind frame where you start dwelling on things, you start getting frustrated, and you allow that negativity to build up. Whereas, you kind of really have to be conscious about that, and you kind of say, okay, I'm in a negative mind frame. I need to stop, relax, drink some water, have a snack, maybe meditate, do whatever I need to do in order to get back in a positive mind frame.
Yeah.
So that, honestly, I probably should have done a little bit more of that. But that's probably my most thing I can actually take from this experience is learning to calm down a little bit sometimes when I'm, and appreciate, not necessarily calming down, but recognizing when I'm just like in that bad mood funk.
Yeah.
I did see another question I would like to touch on. I think I seen someone ask about the photography equipment and like my
Yeah.
photography.
Bernie Imes would like to know a little bit about, can you talk about what your photography during the trip was?
So I brought, again, my main thing I want to do is I'm planning to make a video of this. So on my Pacific Crest Trail, I did a time lapse video of it. So it ended up being a 13-minute video of the entire journey. And I'm planning on making a video after this as well. And after probably a couple months, it takes a while for me to put together everything. But so I had a Sony A7 II with a 18mm prime lens for astrophotography and night shots. I also had a zoom lens for wildlife. I didn't take too many of pictures with those because I wanted to focus on video aspects, but I also brought my star tracker, so it rotates the camera at the exact same rate as the Earth rotates, so it focuses on the stars better. I had a DJI Mavic Pro 2 for my drone shots, which I didn't get to take any drone shots the last couple of days at the end of the river because the wind was more than 15 miles an hour each day. But I also had a GoPro 360. I think we're shooting one video that had the 360 shots. And so between all of that with the solar charger and the battery pack, it added an extra 75 pounds of equipment for this trip. But the photography aspect is probably one of my more like favorite parts of the trip. That actually like, just that challenge, having to wake up at 11 o'clock to get a good star shot, or seeing the many bald eagles. For most days I would see at least 4 or 5 bald eagles every single day.
What do you think that you'll do with all your footage? Do you think that you'll try to publish a small book, or what some people like to do, some different kinds of ways to publish or ways to promote, and some of the things that you had mentioned, like conservation or ecology, or just the education behind the river. Is there a plan, or do you have so much or not enough, or what do you think?
Well, I never think I have enough, because if you take a lot of pictures, take a lot of videos, and it turned out not to be good, well, at least you took them. It's like,
yeah.
So I definitely don't think I have enough. I never think I have enough. But long term, I think I'd like to use some of these things for more conservation outreach. I'd like to put a video together. I think long term, I'd also like to maybe put a book together. I think I'd like to get one more big trip under my belt before I write a book or before I do anything.
Sure.
I'd say on the grand scale of things. And so I'm actually thinking about doing maybe a long term, like a 2,000-3,000 mile bike trip after this to kind of complete the triathlon. I've done a long hike, I've done a long canoe trips, and now I kind of have to do a bike trip. So it's I think maybe after I do another trip, maybe I'll put together all my photos and videos. And I have a couple pictures that got into a few calendars on the Pacific Crest Trail. One of my star shots got into one of the Pacific Crest Trail calendars. And
did you ever follow the Banff Mountain Film Festival?
I haven't.
So a couple of years ago in the Banff Mountain Film Festival, there was a gentleman who rode from Alaska to the tip of South America. And he rode a tandem bike. You have to look that up. Maybe I'll find it and send it to you. But his entire purpose of this adventure was to meet people and have them literally ride with him. Yeah. And of course it's a documentary. So it was unbelievable what he persevered to get from the tip of Alaska to the bottom of South America. But he also, he wrote some stories about the people he'd meet. And you want to talk about people on the river. People would come ride with him and on the back seat, literally, and yeah, it was just really an interesting perspective. I'll have to see if I can find that video and send you the link, because I think you would enjoy it.
Yeah, I'd love that. And that's what makes me, it's almost thing of perspective, is that there are some amazing people doing amazing things like that. And I almost see a story of someone doing something like that, and almost makes me feel like I'm not doing anything. And I feel like it's one of those things where you don't necessarily want to compare yourself, like, because there's always someone doing something great, and so it's easy to feel like you're not necessarily doing anything. necessarily amazing.
One of my other former students, Rob Stein, who's the outdoor program coordinator at University of Central Arkansas, has asked you if you've ever got in touch with Dale Sanders. He's a graybeard adventurer from the Memphis River Angel.
Yeah, actually, I have a shirt around here somewhere. Yeah, I stopped and seen him and signed his wall. And Dale Sanders, I think he's in the middle of hiking the Grand Canyon right now. He's trying to break a world record for being the oldest person to go rim to rim to rim. So
Rob, how do you know him? From your stuff up at Outdoors Incorporated in Memphis, or?
Working Ghost River Outfitters and Memphis Kayak. Yeah, I ran into him a few times with the Club City Canoe Club and Wolf River Conservancy.
Yeah, he's a very, very cool guy, very receptive and very, very interesting. I've heard a lot of people say I want to be like him when I get old. So
And I'm sure you heard his story about floating at 80.
Yeah.
The whole river. He told you all that? Okay.
Yeah. And it's like you meet awesome people on the river like that. I feel like I feel like almost every person who paddles the Mississippi has to kind of stop at Memphis and see him.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of just goes back to, my favorite part of traveling, adventuring, doing things like this is the people. So it is meeting people like Dale. It's meeting people, like hopefully John Rusky. I'd love to meet John Rusky. Is really, I always tell people, the people is always the most part about doing these travels. You realize how good most people are. You get to realize, other people inspired me to do things like this. Where it's just like, oh, I can, I see what you're doing, or I see, so it's, seeing, especially Dale Sanders. Dale Sanders is a cool dude. So.
Awesome.
I was trying to find my book, but I had a professor at the University of Idaho, and he would paddle a lot of the boundary water area for days, for 90 some days, and he wouldn't see a single person. And he wrote an excerpt on one of these books that I have. I'll have to send it to you too. But when he would get back, he would get really emotional because he'd been so disconnected from people and from talking. He did do journaling, which I think was a way for him to communicate, right? But he would go through this somewhat of a withdrawal syndrome when he'd be re-immersed back into society, that he would kind of close off. And he's married, and so
Yeah.
I think his wife, at some point would just sort of learn to accept that this was this transcending period, right, for him to re-immerse in society. But yeah, at one point he spent like 90 some days, and lived off the land and fished in the lakes, and he had a portage a lot. And some of the portages were very dangerous. He'd step out of his canoe and sink all the way up to his neck. And he's older. I mean, he's in his mid 70s. And so, but he continues to do, some of these adventures. And I mean, he writes very eloquently about his experiences. But did you have, and I've always kind of wondered about that. Personally, I've never done anything long-term, but even 3 or 4 or 5, I think the longest I've spent is maybe 9 days on the Rio Grande through the Boquillas Canyon section of in Big Bend, and Rob has been with me on that, and so has Taylor. And I think there's a period where like we're together, right? And so it's really interesting. But I do find that even I have a little bit of like, when you leave the area, I have a withdrawal about leaving the area, but I've never had that withdrawal about leaving people, because I've always been around people when I'm on my expeditions. But did you have a similar sort of like being on this river with no interaction? Like maybe what was the longest days that you went without actually seeing another person, like personally, like physically speak to them?
It wasn't as long as you might think. I mean, I bet the longest was near the beginning part of the river where it was still 20, 30, 40 feet wide. Probably a week was about the longest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think long term, I don't think I didn't have the same type of withdrawal that you're talking about, because I know what you're talking about. I had more of that on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different feeling, as though, like I said, like 4,000 to 5,000 people a year apply for the permit. Who knows how many actually try to do the whole thing. I think like 500-600 people a year finish it. But that's a trail where you're still around a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone has like a trail life. Everyone farts around each other. Everyone, you know, lives very rudimentary. Everyone just has like everyone's dirty, smelly, doesn't shower, you know, and then going back into civilization and you're like, oh man, I'm in line at the post office. I can't just fart around everyone. Like, you know, I've had that happen when I got off the trail where I was just like, oh yeah, I have to like actually live like I'm in society again.
Right.
So I've had that on the PCT, and I know exactly what you're talking about, but I really didn't have that on the river because I feel like even though I was by myself, especially after I got past Minnesota, there were boaters driving up to me. How you doing?
Mhm.
You need anything? I was trying to stop and get like a burger and a beer whenever I could, you know,
Yeah.
off the river, just because again, having, you know, regular food and a soda or something, you know, I feel like I still had enough connections where I never truly, you know, felt isolated like I would in the Boundary Waters.
Yeah.
You know, Boundary Waters, especially out in the middle of nowhere, I could see myself getting like that up there. But
Well, just to throw this out there to you, Taylor, Rob, and I, we're going to be going to the, and I'm trying to get Michael to come too, but we're going to be going to the Rio Grande the week right after Thanksgiving. So if you want to pack your canoe back up and let us know, we can take you out on the Rio.
yeah, well, I'll consider it. We'll see what I'm doing around then.
Well, look, man, we are really appreciative. We know that you've been on us with almost an hour telling your story and sharing some footage. Is there anybody that has any last questions that you would like to ask? I'm going to go ahead and pop up that one screen that allows you to go ahead and find Dustin on social media. And he's also posted a YouTube video of his PCT voyage. So if you have any interest of following him on there or seeing that, let me just pop up the screen right here for you. Is there any last minute you'd like to say, Dustin, too?
Yeah, and if anyone like has any interest in doing anything, is doing any of these long adventures, doing paddling, hiking, doing like that, like feel free to contact me to you know, get some help, get some pointers. I love you know, getting people out and, you know, kind of doing these things, getting outside and appreciating nature. So I'll provide all the help that I possibly can to anyone that has any photography questions, anyone that has any outdoor you know, adventure questions. So.
And just to be kind of clear, your travel journal is at www.postholer.com/Dusty Roads.
Yep. So every day I wrote about 3 or 4 paragraphs and I had pictures, and so you can kind of read about my frustrations. You can read about the positive days. You can kind of read about my day-to-day adventures down the river. So.
And then you can follow Dustin on Instagram at Traveling Dusty Roads. And he also has a YouTube channel called Traveling Dusty Roads. And then he's also, of course, on Facebook. So I'm not sure he'll let you all like him, but.
I enjoy people, so I won't turn anyone down. But yeah, so, you know, like I said, if you can appreciate, you know, try to put the word out for kind of conserving the water and, you know, kind of getting rid of trash and everything. So.
Yeah. Well, listen, we really do appreciate your time this evening. We are congratulating you. You're getting lots of thanks and praise from the people who are still on here. So if there isn't any last minute questions, we'll probably let him go. We'll let Dustin go get a beer and enjoy his girlfriend and enjoy New Orleans tonight. So is there any last minute questions from anyone? All right. Well, man, thank you so much for this. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in with us. And enjoy your evening. And like I said, if you do make your way through Cleveland, Mississippi, man, stop in. I'm sure half of my students would love to see you, and we definitely make you some accommodations.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll definitely have to look forward to that.
All right, sounds good. Well, listen, take care of yourself. Thanks y'all for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you, President Ford. We appreciate it.
You bet. All the best.